You know, like, you know what annoys me the most about this is that actually that it is our year one class, or not just our year one class too, but our year one students that are more concerned about this than our working professionals. Like, you lot just are just really are the secondary and tertiary whatever strata of society. Anyway, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I thought we would today have a mild conversation about why sanctions, or what sanctions are, how they're working, and why, at least in my opinion, they're not working. Because, you know, like, yeah, how they're not working. And this is it actually is a bit of a problem, right? Because as we will see, the way that sanctions work as they are currently, they really benefit organized crime and off the record systems much more than the spirit of the sanctions, right? So let's talk real quick about what the sanctions themselves are. Sanctions on Russia, right? So, like, one, obviously there is the sanctions on semiconductors, and then there is the self-sanctioning by Western companies, which essentially together these two things means that on not just on semiconductors but on business Western business in general. And what this really means is that there's very little trade that's happening between Russia and the West at the moment, right? There is also the cap on oil prices via, what is it, insurance and reinsurance. And this is meant to essentially say, oh, Russia is going to force Russia to sell its oil at, you know, below a certain cap, so that the country doesn't make that much money from it. Obviously, it the way that the energy prices are right now, the cap is essentially non-existent. It doesn't work, because the euros is selling at, I can't remember what euros is selling at. Actually, I'm not even gonna bother looking it up. Euros is selling at some amount that is definitely below. Russian crude is selling at below cap anyway. Refined products are less emphasized. So the one place where the sanctions are kind of working here is in refined products, right? And so, what did I want to put up here? I have no idea. No idea. That's fine. But let's talk about sort of like their net effect on society, because we've talked about this before, and we've had, you know, spirited discussions on this. And so let's think a little bit more about the topic. Hopefully some of our year 2 and 3 students can start understanding what the bloody hell they've been supporting all this time. So how they aren't working. Wonderful little article in, I want to say, the Bloomberg. Let me just double check. I just read it this morning. Yeah, in Bloomberg. On Bloomberg today, about semiconductor imports. semiconductor imports into Russia have grown exponentially, basically zero since 2021, right? And so 2022, 2022. Well, I mean, since essentially since before the war, and so obviously we in the West have imposed essentially an export ban on basically everything against Russia, and so you would imagine that nothing is getting in, right? Because that is what these sanctions are portrayed as. Sanctions are portrayed to the average person as nothing is getting into Russia, but obviously that's not true, right? Like that's not true, and so that's exactly what the Bloomberg article was talking about, which is that semiconductor imports into Russia from third-party countries. So in this case, what was it? Kazakhstan, Turkey, Serbia have grown dramatically, and that's not to say that it completely makes up for the volume of what it was beforehand, because obviously it obviously doesn't, and it takes a long time for this to establish. So people will cite stuff like look at the retail microcontroller parts in Russian weapons. Ha 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 ha. Sanctions are working. And that's sort of not the point, right? Because it takes a while for these networks to establish themselves, but once they have, then that means your sanctions are completely useless. Well, that your sanctions are not completely useless, but your sanctions have the net effect of making life miserable for the average person and not very much for the military. And not only that, you are essentially using higher prices in the West to subsidize these these gray export routes and creating these patronage networks that will continue even after the war ends, even after everything has ended. Like that. Exactly. Let me. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say here that it took some time to re-establish, or no, not re-establish, to establish new routes back into Russia via third-party countries, but it has happened, and while this is less than previous direct trading, obviously only the rich and powerful will get these imports. And so the net effect of this is that, I should probably have done this. No, I've done this. Okay. And so the net effect means that the average Russian citizen is less well off, and excuse me, with lower quality of life, right? That's the first part. The second part is, and this is key, right? Because of these sanctions, it has also pushed up Western inflation, right? Like to say that the sanctions have nothing to do with inflation would be complete ridiculousness. I'm not even going to address that because that's just stupid. And so a part of Western inflation is due to this effect and effectively subsidizes the creation of these legally gray MREX markets, and goes to funding, let's say new let's say criminal networks, not criminal, new semi-legal networks which will persist after the war, right? So really the point that we're making here is that these sanctions, they have made life difficult for the poor across the world, not just in Russia, not just in EU or in America, but also the global South. All sorts of essentially, it's made life worse for basically everyone, right? And at the same time, that money that was essentially lost by the poor has gone to creating these gray routes. So as a result, all sorts of supply chains are much less efficient, blah 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 blah. And that's not to say, again, the original idea of limiting Russian access to modern technology to discourage its action is sort of the point of these sanctions, but the actual effect of these sanctions is not that, right? Because obviously a autocracy, an oligarchy, whatever, anyone under sanction will prioritize the survival of the organization first and foremost. And so therefore the people that actually suffer from sanctions are the average people, right? Like if we actually go and look at the way that sanctions have worked, really I'm desperately trying to think of examples where sanctions have properly worked and encouraged people to do a complete rethink of who they are. And I really haven't seen any. No, the Soviet Union's fall is not. No, because that's more a dissolution. That's more just like the entire thing fell apart. And I mean, okay, if you consider that hold on, you cannot consider sanctions as being successful at winning versus the Soviet Union, because the current Russian question is a direct result of the failure to bring the country into the West, into the what am I trying to say? Into the international system, right? Like you simply can't, right? Like in the 1990s, what happened? The massive amount of privatization, the creation of an oligarchy, and the living standards for the average Russian. I actually can't remember, but I don't remember it growing. And so like you just have a bunch of like there's an entire like lost 2 or 3 generations because of sanctions. And no, so I don't dispute that the Soviet Union collapsed due to economic failure. Absolutely, 100%. Blame Brezhnev. So to me, it is more of a failure of Brezhnev than it is a success of sanctions. But that's sort of a whole other issue. Brezhnev versus sanctions. That's a whole other issue. right? Like, I don't think I don't think it's possible for anyone to argue that there was a lost generation of Soviet and Russian citizens between, let's say, about the 1970s to today, right? Like, that's like that entire generation, those entire two generations have just been completely lost because of the lack of institutions, because of the lack um, of a renaissance, right? Like, there are interesting Russian cultural questions that, but we're not going to address them for today because obviously we don't have time. We're at 15 minutes already. I haven't even talked about how they're working yet. Refined petroleum products are less in demand, and thus Russian can't spell, exports switch over to crude, right? And that's fine. That's, I mean, fine for a particular way of thinking about it, in that, you know, they are switching over to exporting more crude, and there is a little bit of revenue loss there, but there was always going to be revenue loss. But the revenue loss is not high enough to really justify the pain that the sanctions have caused on both the Western average consumer and the Russian consumer, right? The average person, and so. The commies did not win. I sort of personally, I wish that in the 1990s we were less like the leadership of major Western countries were less embroiled in their own bullshit, right? Like, like after the fall of the Soviet Union was essentially almost immediately, can't speak. Almost immediately, it was Newt Gingrich, right? And so, and then Bill, and then obviously we had the Bush years. But you could sort of see, like, after America lost its primary geopolitical rival, it sort of turned inwards, as American culture tends to do, right? And so, I will admit, yes, there are those particular cases. Let's say sanctions are a good way to cause broad-based pain, right? Like, yeah, of course, if you take away their yachts, they'll be sad, but, like, you know, they had nowhere else to put their money anyway, so of course they put it into yachts, right? Just no. You know what? This conversation is getting. Okay, guys, can we bring it back and talk about, you know, something like that isn't what you lot are talking about? Okay, so here's my ultimatum to you, boys and girls. Ultimatum. I can't spell ultimatum. Bring the conversation back within a minute, or we can continue offline. As in, I will just shut down the stream so that we can actually talk about this, because obviously that discussion is important, and that's sort of my point, right? Like, that discussion is important, and I do want to have that discussion, but we cannot have that discussion with me talking on air, Does that make sense? Like, this discussion is important, but because I can't talk about it on air, it's better for us to do so privately afterwards. Yeah, so if you guys really want to talk about it now, perfectly legit, perfectly reasonable. It just means I shut down the stream so that we can talk about it. I'll stay on the camera. I'll stay on my microphone. That's fine. Not the camera. I'll stay on the microphone, and we can discuss this. But we would do so offline. Yes. Let's ask our sponsors. Year 1, Class 2. Are you happy with sort of why the sanctions are not working? I mean, this is not exhaustive. I should put that in. Note. This is can't spell. Not exhaustive. Description. Not an exhaustive description of the current sanctions regime. Okay, so yeah, so then we will shut down the stream and then we will continue that conversation offline. Well, you know, I forgot to wink yesterday. Let me wink first. And then let's go. Thank you very much for watching. In conclusion, please download Firefox. Please don't do Chrome. And potentially I'll see you lot tomorrow. If not, whatever, I'll see you guys on Monday. Yes, or I'll see. I'll see our public. I'll see you lot publicly via my avatar on Monday if we don't have a stream tomorrow. Okay. Did I say download Firefox? Download Firefox, don't do Chrome. And yeah, that's it. And another wink for today. Wink. And oh, I forgot to set up the stopping. Okay. Okay, we're stopping now. Bye.